I'm Arya Schwartz, and welcome to the Winsidr Show, where it's all about the W. A storm is brewing. Matt Cohen's in the booth with me to discuss the rebuilt Seattle Storm. They've added tons of firepower this offseason, so let's discuss this team that sees themselves as a contender. Welcome back to the show. Very excited to be here with my pal, Matt Cohen. Matt, how's it going?
Going well, Arya. How are you?
Not too shabby. We're talking about a team that has gone in probably the quickest turnaround of rebuild in WNBA history, in sports history, and street construction history. Well, no, because there's that one street in Japan that fell in, and then 5 days later, like a day later, it was completely fixed. Whatever. Rants we go on. Matt Cohen, when you get a chance, when I'm done talking, please summarize the Seattle Storm season last year in their downtrodden.
Yeah, it's a pretty quick and sad story. Once Stewie made her decision to make for greener pastures in Brooklyn.
Well, I don't know. Whoa. Bluer pastures.
Sorry.
Seattle's green, New York's blue.
Fair.
The seafoam, whatever.
Go. Yeah, for seafoam pastures. Fine.
There you
go. Seafoam pastures. Seattle sort of, was sort of out of luck on the season and went more for a youth movement. They finished 11-29. They were the second worst team, 11th seed in the end. And as you said, made very quick work of after a very bad season.
I want to remind all of our friends, all of our listeners, please check out our show notes for sponsor and affiliate links. If you're getting WNBA merch, please use our links. It helps us and it helps our sponsors. We just started working with some online sports books, so definitely check that out if you're into the whole gambling and putting money down on WNBA games or any other sport. But if you have a gambling problem, please get help. Use the phone number in the show notes. So the Seattle Storm, let's go over who they lost. From last year, this year, Kia Nurse, Gabby Williams, and Yvonne Turner were the big ones in free agency / this offseason and draft. They added Victoria Vivians, Nneka Ogwumike, Nika Mule, and Skylar Diggins-Smith. This team is it's masterful in the sense of they were able to add top free agents that fit the needs of this team. You don't often get that. You often get the top free, because it's so much of timing, Matt. If Seattle needed, a different player, more of a wing, there wasn't a superstar wing who was in free agency this year. If Seattle needed somebody to be a seventh woman off the bench to replace Sammy Whitcomb, that's all they needed. There wasn't that necessarily player in free agency. If they needed a Mercedes Russell or someone to fill in for Ezzy, there wasn't necessarily that player in free agency or in the draft. So timing worked out, positioning worked out, and let's say it, the facility timing worked out. The players want to play for teams that have these facilities. Nneka and Skylar have both talked about that in their reasoning interviews for why they went there. This team, I'm excited, but I want to, sit down, slow my roll, cool off for a moment. What do you think? Just looking at the roster, what are the things that stand out to you? What kind of pops out?
It's a very intriguing roster. A lot of these moves sort of happen pretty quickly throughout the offseason. And, for a team like this that can attract a couple of really big star name players like Nneka and Skylar, you would expect them to be pretty then top heavy, but it's not really the case. I think what stands out to me is that this team has a decent amount of depth, especially in the front court. You have Nneka, but you also have Ezzy Magbagor, who is a rising star in the league. You have Mercedes Russell, who is a decent enough vet to carry you for, not to make mistakes for a number of minutes. You've got Victoria Vivians, who's a great veteran, who's got a lot of versatility to her game. You saw Jordan Horston coming on of late last year. Dulcie Fankam-Mengiadu had her moments. And now you're bringing in Anika Mule. This team has a lot of different parts that need to figure out how to come together. But what's really impressive is that, and that's not even to mention Jewel Lloyd. So this team has so many different parts to it, lots of depth at different places on the roster. And so I'm really impressed by just how it filled out and looking forward to seeing how those parts come together.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because I always look, all right, if we break it down this way, when we look at some of these other teams in this league, the more I look at this team might be one of the more deep teams. And I know I've been on other podcasts because we've been doing breakdowns. Shout out to our amazing staff who's joined me and listened to me rant for far too many hours, doing one of these episodes for each team. Definitely check them out. They're worth a listen. But in some of the other episodes, I was like, I scan when I'm doing one team, I'll scan some other teams. So in comparison, in conjunction, whatever, but it's not an in-depth look. When I prepare for each episode, then it's more of an in-depth look on this team. When scanning the Storm, I wasn't that high on their depth. In now looking at it and going, okay, they have a deep 6, right? And then you look and they go, oh, they also have Horsted, a young player and up and come. They have a Victoria Vivians, a player who's had some injury issues, but can shoot the clip from 3 quite beautifully. And then you add Niga, and we'll get Dulcie, fine. But adding, I'm actually quite a big fan, but adding those players, and I know Chris, the graphic guy, will be mad if we don't talk about Jade Melbourne, but this team has depth. I'm not going to sit there and say that the depth of this team is blowing my mind, greatest depth, deepest team in the league, blah, blah, blah. But they have depth in where they need depth. They have some depth in size. They have some depth in the perimeter. They have some depth in shooting. A lot of times with teams, it's like, okay, you might have depth, but when those bench players come in, you understand that the scoring ability of that set is going to drop like crazy. This team, at least as they flex people out or as they rotate, they still have shooting depth. You have backup point guards who can facilitate. You have players who have size and can attack the basket. You have players who can hit it from deep. I think that if this team can figure it out, we're talking about a legit contender who's up there with the New Yorks and the Vegases. And the only reason I'm not saying with the Connecticut's is because I'm this close to putting $10 down that Connecticut has a dropout of a season. But this team, am I going overboard? Am I just looking at them too closely? Or is this team legitimately able to, if they meld, compete, be up there with those 2 other top dogs?
So here's the thing about it. Seattle last year, their offense was atrocious. It was 11th in scoring. It was last in field goal percentage, assists, offensive rating, effective field goal percentage, and true shooting percentage. There is no way with these players, unless they're all hurt, this can be any worse. So, and I'm putting it very bluntly. You don't bring in a NECA, you don't bring in a Skylar, and you don't, have a healthy Ezzy and Jewel and whatnot, and have a team around these players, not just the fulcrum being Jewel Lloyd, who was absolutely incredible, by the way, last season. You don't bring those players in and expect your offense to be that poor. And so it can only go up from here. And so, no, do I think their depth can match a Vegas? No, I really don't. Not yet, at least. And there's still other pieces that would need to fall into place or come to this team for that to happen. Which I don't know if that's going to happen during this season.
Well, let me rephrase it then, because I do agree with you that I don't think any other team in this league, as of today until we start play, is on the same level of Vegas. I've been saying this all season long, so I think I've misworded. Vegas, there's clearly a gap between Vegas and whoever's next. But I'm curious, if we do this in a tier system, if Seattle melds well, do you see them being comparable in that same level with New York? Or do you think there's still a gap between them and New York?
No, I think it's definitely possible. It's not going to happen by a Father's Day. It might not even happen by the 4th of July. But what it might happen by is after the Olympic break, and they're coming back, and that's when things start to really, the playoffs are near. They're coming back. They're all back and refreshed and ready to roll, and they're now motivated and driven, and they've had that time together to work together. In terms of New York, I know I'm not doing the New York pod. I'm sure you have Owen, Miles, or both of them coming on for that one.
We had Ace for that one, but whatever.
Oh, all right. I must have missed that one.
No, they're busy. It's coming out today.
Oh, good. I'll have to give it a listen. I think New York is going to take a small step back. I don't see them as a team that is a group, is a full team. I see a lot of players that are a little more individual on that squad. And so I think that this Seattle team, as we've said, if all goes well for them and they're able to find rhythm, where Jewel is okay, maybe taking 5 or 6 fewer shots at minimum than she was getting last season, and is okay working in system with NECA, working in system with Skylar and Ezzy and Mercedes and Jordan and whomever else. If they can figure out how to make that happen, I actually think that they might be a deeper team than what New York is. And I think do I think then in a playoff series in like the semis where Seattle and New York are facing each other, is that a guaranteed win for Seattle? No. But do I think that they have, if it all goes the way that you would describe as a way to be competitive and actually might be able to beat them? I definitely think so.
So first of all, I completely agree. I think New York has gotten worse this season. Players got older. The only player on their roster who benefits from getting older, fine, Sabally, but is Sabrina. Everyone else, that's a negative that they're getting older. Second of all, I truly think if this team fits well and is coached well, and that's why, look, Noelle Quinn is not on my top list of best coaches in the league. And similar to when I was talking with you on that other episode with Atlanta, I think this could be a hot seat season for Noelle Quinn just because of the amount of talent. The Seattle Storm team under Noelle Quinn has been underwhelming. Like, let's just put it as it is. Last year was because the roster was bad. Fine. You can use that as the reasoning, the excuse, whatever you want to call it. Some will push back. I'm not even going to push back and say it could have been better than it was. Because you know what? I think they did. They grew young players. They got players better, and they put themselves in a situation to be where they are right now. So I'm not even going to take that stance. I'm just going to say, during the Noelle Quinn era of Seattle Storm, they have not been a good basketball team. They've underperformed. It's been underwhelming. And so I look at it and I go, this has so much talent, this team, so much investment in it. I have to think you got to put them on the hot seat. And that's just me coming from this professional sports. If you can't perform and have them. Now, that said, I'm trying to kind of distance my mind from the idea that I've seen New York play. I know what I can get from New York. And that comes with tons of positives and tons of negatives. We haven't seen, we've seen them in preseason. We haven't seen the Seattle Storm team truly play yet. And so it's hard to almost put them above a team that was so great at times last year, even if we all have our issues with New York Liberty. But honestly, the main thing that's on my mind right now when I think about Seattle and New York possibly playing in the playoffs is how poetic it would be if Seattle knocked Stewie out, moved on, and stopped Vegas from winning a three-peat. That would be Hallmark-esque, movie-esque, whatever you want to say. Yeah, I'm curious how the starting five. I'm more so curious about the starting five. How, if it is Mercedes, Ezzy, NECA, Skylar, and Jewel, which I assume it would be, or maybe they want to throw an Ezzy, NECA, Mercedes off the bench, start Jordan. I don't know. I mean, I do think that this team does have the ability to kind of shift for who they're playing. But I'm curious for you how you see Ezzy, Mercedes, and NECA kind of paint a picture of how their play in your mind can play off of each other in a positive way.
Well, that's one of the big things that I wrote down in terms of questions about this team is the spacing. Because you've got NECA and you've got Ezzy and you've got Mercedes. They're big. They're tall players. It's something where we see in a league where spacing is everything. It's adopted a lot of what the men's league is doing with, and even before that, with 3-pointers and fast scoring and whatnot. And so for me, my biggest question is, Can they space well enough? Can they run the floor together well enough? And they're great athletes. There's no question about that. But if Seattle is going to operate in the half court, how are they going to make that happen? And so we know Nneka is going to be a mainstay. She's probably going to be out there for, if she's healthy, for probably 34, 35 minutes a game, maybe a little less than that, maybe more, depending on what Noelle needs in that moment. And so Ezzy is probably the second then. So if we're going to assume that at least Nneka and Ezzy are going to be playing together, which one of them is going to pull out of the paint a little bit? Who is going to be able to stretch the floor a little bit? Is Nneka going to be able to hit threes? Is Ezzy going to be able to hit any threes? And so I think it's going to have to be upon Noelle. And I agree with you that I think this is sort of a make it year for Noelle as well, to be able to demonstrate that she can coach a team like this. And so who's going to be able to stretch that floor? We know Jewel can shoot the three. We know Skylar can. And if they're going to go three bigs a la LA last year, we saw in LA it didn't work very well. When you have three bigs like that, it doesn't always work. And so my concern is, I don't know if all three at the same time is going to work unless you're playing a big team. But even then, you're going to have to figure out a rotation. If it were me, I would have Ezzy and Nneka starting. I would probably have Jordan. If Nika midseason demonstrates an ability to function very well, I would shift Skylar down to the 2 and have Nika be running point then, and give Skylar a little bit more flexibility, but that's not what you asked about. But I would have Mercedes then sort of shifting in and have 2 of those 3 on the court at a time, especially because Mercedes is a little bit more of a traditional big. And I would want to see her then stick to the paint and have one of the other ones pull out a little bit.
I do think, like, when I think Mercedes, Nneka, Ezzy, I think Ezzy full, you can pull her, put her anywhere you need to put her. In, out, whatever. Nneka is more midway, and then Mercedes is in the paint. That's kind of the way I view it. And honestly, I look at it and this might be a weird comparison, but I think of Bree Jones, Alyssa Thomas, and DeWanna Bonner in the sense of spacing and size and constantly needing to move. Obviously, I think the style of play for Seattle is going to be a little bit more modern, a little bit more fun, a little bit more shooting heavy versus just like bulldozer down to the ball. That said, I think, I look at this team, and the other thing about the depth is look, if any team deals with a string of injuries to their key players, they're going to have issues. But I think that this team might also be more set roster-wise to cover for each other if there are injuries. Whereas Vegas, I know people will push back and say, like, look at Vegas, they were able to win with major injuries in the playoffs. I think that was almost running on adrenaline, running on fumes, running on the high of how great that team is. I don't know if those injuries happen earlier in the season if they have that same result. Almost similar to, like, when a player gets injured on a team and it's an important player, I feel like there's kind of it's a split in the road, a fork in the road. One way is you have that initial good play because you're rallying behind it. The other is you're distracted, you're distraught. And I think Vegas was kind of in that, the positive side of it. This team is the depth. If they can stay healthy, they have depth. If they can buy in, I'll say it. My biggest question for this team is coaching style. Is what is she going to be able to get out of this team? Because I look at the roster, I have questions on the roster, but I don't think my questions are nearly as big as some of the questions I have for other teams that I have in a similar position. Obviously, look, Skylar Diggins-Smith has never been on a team this good. So I'm curious how that works. We haven't seen Mercedes or Ezzy be on a contention team with this big of a role yet. We know what Sammy can do on this team. Honestly, it's not even like questions. It's more like I just want to see him play already. Like, this is going to be a fun team to play. This might be the most. Let me ask you this: what team do you? But obviously, ignore Vegas. What team is more fun to watch than this?
I mean, if you're talking about, I guess it depends on if you love watching awesome veteran stars dominate the game or you love watching young potential stars dominate the game. So otherwise, it's Indiana, and I think everyone who's coming into the league is like, oh, I know Caitlin Clark, but also Nalissa Smith, who is an absolute baller and has totally forgotten on the squad, and Aaliyah Boston, and et cetera, et cetera. They're going to be fun. They're going to be awesome and exciting. But you also look at it then at Seattle, and as we just been talking about, they have all these awesome veteran stars who are great. Skylar's coming back. Ezzy's incredible, had an amazing season last year. She's been dominating in the offseason, and we'll see where she goes now. And so, I think the veterans and some of that, a little bit of that youth, but more established players, if you like them more, Seattle is going to be your more fun team.
All right, fine. Get the new fans involved. I get it. Any other questions that we haven't touched on for this team? Because I feel like
all
right.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big one is going to be can Skylar and Noelle coexist?
Mm.
That isn't to say that Noelle isn't capable. And I've been one of, I think, amongst our smaller circles, obviously with you, me, and RG, we've been talking a lot about, coaching and stuff. And I've been one of the biggest Noelle sympathizers for a couple of years now. I think there's more that we just haven't seen. But will her softer demeanor work with Skylar? Is Skylar willing to cooperate? Will they get along? Will they mesh? What happens if they're on like a 3-game losing streak and Noelle challenges Skylar, or Skylar's pushing back at Noelle, or whatever the case is? If they have some of those growing pains together, is it going to take a NECA or a Jewel to step in and mediate some of that, or the two of them, can they squash some of that beef together? Is that not going to happen at all? I think that's going to be a telling piece. Is we know Skylar is a fiery, competitive, can be so on and a great star in this league, but also I think some of that temperament can grind on teammates, but also on coaches. And will Noelle be able to absorb a lot of that? Or because you said this is the best team that she's been on, is she going to be more mellow? Is she going to be able to coexist with Noelle? And I think that is going to be another X factor that we haven't talked about yet.
Yeah, very, very fair. I think, look, when it comes to personality meshing, I think often people like to push back and get all angry, like, oh, how dare you? Not like everyone knows this, because most people have jobs or have had a job at a point. And like in working, you understand that like there's people that you're friends with, there's people you can stand, and then there's the people who really grind your gears. And it's the same thing, except maybe the biggest difference is that in the W, there's millions of people watching you. There's hundreds of thousands of people screaming at you and tweeting at you daily, if not millions, and pushing things. And so I think there's always that element of like, and meshing is something that we talked about in Phoenix when Skylar was there, when Tina was there, when now Natasha Cloud and Sophie and Ka are there. Everyone's talking about meshing. I think it's only fair to discuss that also with Skylar, but I don't know how much more to discuss, more than like I'm excited to watch. Keep your eyes out, fans.
For sure. And I just want to say, I don't want to sort of, for lack of a better term, neuter her personality. I think I love the fieriness. I love that spirit, but it has to be done in the right way that's constructive for the team is all.
Yeah, exactly. Oh yeah, totally fair. Yeah, I think we've kind of touched on everything. Expectations for me, I think we touched on that. Hopes is championship. This team has the talent to win a championship. There's no question about that. Expectations, they better be a top 5 team. Like that. And honestly, top 5 isn't that hard in the league is 12 when you have a talented roster. And I'm sorry, like I'm being blunt here. Majority of the league makes it to the playoffs. So it's not about making the playoffs. It's about being a top team that's showing night in and night out that they're contending. They got players. NECA knows how to win a championship. Sammy knows how to win a championship. Obviously, Jewel knows how to win a championship. It's time for them to show Skylar, Ezzy, Victoria, and Horston and make that next move. Do you disagree with my expectations and thoughts?
No, I would even push it a step further. I think when you look at the roster and the contracts, Jewel and Skylar are signed past next year, but most of their roster is a UFA after the season. So there has to be a sense of urgency on this team to get this done this year, because we don't know if NECA is going to resign. We don't know where some of these other players may or may not be. And so it might be harder to get everyone to come back. So this has to be a team with championship aspirations, and that has to be your goal. You can't be like, well, finishing second to Vegas is it's no bad place to finish. Well, you can't have that mentality. So my hope is, that they're competing up there in the top 3 with a New York, with a Vegas, with maybe a Connecticut if they stay hot for some reason or whatever it may be. The expectation is they're a top 3 team, maybe even top 2. certainly by I would say mid to end June, you need, with a month into the season, you need to figure out how this is going to come together. And my expectation is that's where it's going to be, and you're going to be one of those top seeds. You're going to get home court for part of the playoffs or whatever it is, and then you're going to go in and see where it goes from there. But the hope is that they will be competing in the finals against Vegas, because if they're healthy and they come together, that's where that's their ceiling.
I'm with it. I agree with everything. Who's your GOAT?
Pickle.